Hello, International School of Indiana community. Thank you so much for joining us here at this recorded Heritage Panel podcast. My name is Elizabeth Head. I'm the head of school at ISI, and this is one of my favorite events that we do each month. ISI has a strategic plan. We're in our first year of our new 5-year strategic plan, and pillar one of that strategic plan is community culture. And one of the many different aspects and strategies that we have related to building community culture is a monthly heritage panel. And I am so excited that this month we're focusing on Black History Month, specifically related to African American heritage and what that means in today's society. So I'm honored to be here today with a moderator, Ahmed Young, and two panelists who I won't introduce because they will introduce themselves. But what you'll hear today is the essence of the mission and vision of ISI. This is who we are. Each of these heritage panels each month exemplify the reasons so many of us choose ISI for our children. And it's to be part of a rich, diverse community. And this today, what you'll hear is a wonderful example of why Pillar One is so important to what we do strategically. And that's building authentic, honest community culture. So thank you, Ahmed, for leading us during this time. Take it away.
Thank you, Liz. Really appreciate you laying the foundation for this conversation and inviting myself, Marshawn, and Stacy to share not only our personal experiences, but things that we've experienced professionally as well. My wife and I first came to ISI when our oldest, who is now 13, was a 3-year-old. And we were figuring out what was the ideal environment for our growing superstar that she is and is becoming. And we landed on ISI. And it's been a journey. And part of that journey is wrestling with identity, wrestling with issues of race, culture, economic status, and the like. And ISI has consistently been a part of that experience for our daughter, and now for our 9-year-old and for our 6-year-old. So we've had 3 of our children at ISI over the years, and ISI has been a consistent presence in our lives. And that's why I'm so excited about this conversation. Just 2 days ago, I was in Dakar, Senegal for several reasons. But one of the biggest experiences and most important experiences that I had when I was in Dakar was going to Gorée Island. And Gorée Island is known as one of the major hubs as a part of the transatlantic slave trade. And many people have this perception that that is the start of Black or African American history. And that's a common misnomer. Our history goes back significantly farther than that. And recognizing that that is a part of our history, it's important to live out the concept of Sankofa. And Sankofa means to look back in order to move forward thoughtfully. And this conversation right here is a part of that spirit of Sankofa. We're looking back on our past experiences, our present experiences, and ideally laying a foundation for something that's going to be fruitful and meaningful and positive for not only this current generations, but generations to come. I would love to open it up to Stacy first to tell us who she is, her connection to ISI, and what she wants to get from this conversation.
Absolutely. My name is Stacy Davis. I have a daughter who is also 13, who has been in the Mandarin program since she was in kindergarten. So I will echo that this has been a journey in a very good way, with her getting to travel across the country, all over the world now. She got to visit China. So definitely, it was interesting to hear her perceptions of race in a different country and how she was received and how she was perceived. So I'm excited to definitely listen and learn and also share some of my experiences as an African-American woman in America.
And what would you like to get from this conversation, or what do you think will make this conversation successful?
Absolutely. I think the number one thing is just to educate the audience about all the different experiences within the African American experience, that we are not a monolith. You can have 5 people in the room and have 5 totally vastly different experiences. And that's how we learn from each other. And that's also how we build connections and see how, I know we're going to talk about this later, but the intersectionality, that's a fascinating topic. So I'm excited to talk about that and educate the audience as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Stacy. Marshawn, your connection to ISI and what do you think will make this conversation successful?
Yeah, so I'm Alexander Wally's dad. He's, I think, a 7th grader right now, and very proud of him. We have just really kind of started our journey with ISI. So he's in year 2, and he's working on Spanish and saxophone. So we're really excited about that. Played soccer a little bit, didn't really like soccer as much, but that's okay. I really appreciate just the international experience that ISI presents and provides for students and then even family. Just having the opportunity to interact with his friends and the family of his friends and the different cultures that they represent. And so I think that's just been really important in his own personal development and an opportunity for me to, get to know other people as well. I too have been to Africa, and when I think about Sankofa and the experiences that I had going to the place of no return with the castles on the coast of Ghana, West Africa, being able to look back and think about really the questions that we received before, and think about when did I learn about my Blackness, and how did I navigate those spaces. I'm looking forward to really interrogating that. I've thought about that, but I'm looking forward to seeing just what unfolds in this conversation. Really getting at just the complexities of Blackness and being a Black person or African American in this country. I think that going back to the issue of intersectionality, I'm going to be curious of where my colleagues or my panelists land on those particular issues. And so I'm looking forward to both learning, but then also getting the opportunity to talk through some of my own experiences and really kind of see what happens here, because I really don't know what's going to happen.
Well, I think you're going to be a key part in making it happen. So I'll start with you for the first question, Marshawn, if you don't mind. What events or experiences in your life really shaped how you view not only your Blackness, but being a Black man, African American in this country, in America, particularly in our current context?
Yeah, no, definitely. So I think the first time I was introduced to the concept of race was in 3rd grade, when a teacher asked us a series of questions about who was better. And in that experiment, like, I didn't really understand, like, at the time, what she was doing or where she was going with this. The questions were like, who's more attractive, or who's smarter, or who's, whatever. And we only had Black and white students in the classroom, and I struggled with it because I was saying, well, I don't really know even really how to answer that question. It's both. And I think that was her point in the exercise, but it did also trigger me starting to think about, okay, well, why would she have us do this in the first place, and what was really going on. But I also took away the message of there's not a superiority amongst different races and different groups, and I think that was one key important lesson. But there are like differences, and so one of the things that was important from a social or historical context was I grew up in the 90s, and in the 90s, being a Black male was perceived as dangerous, and we talked at that time about being an endangered species. And what was really meant by that was there was a high level of violence occurring and concern about death happening. And so there was a lot of concern amongst the larger community that was around me, the church community, my parents. I remember going to church and being prayed for, like having to go down to the altar and all the Black males being gathered and them having to pray for us. And so that was another experience. And then going away to college and having the opportunity to learn about African American history in a more detailed way, learning about African American literature in a more in a deeper way. I had a great education, but it wasn't there wasn't a time for me to really focus on African American history or literature. And so I majored in African American studies as one of my majors at IU. And that really gave me the opportunity to not only dig deeper, I actually started to explore African American philosophy. And so at one point I thought I'd be a philosophy professor, but then I decided, I wanted to do some other things. And so I pursued the other things. But it gave me an opportunity to think critically and deeply about some of the other things I think we're going to talk about, intersectionality, the differences, but then some experiences that bring, I think, African Americans together from a historical perspective, trying to overcome systemic challenges, particularly like in the criminal justice system, maybe even sometimes in the education system. Social economic issues come into play in deeper ways and in large segments of our community. And so trying to overcome poverty. I didn't really grow up with a silver spoon in my mouth. And so had some different experiences there. And so I think that's part of what really animated my education.
A lot to unpack there. I have at least 18 follow-up questions just based on what you shared just now. But when you first got to IU, what was that experience like? Was there a culture shock there? What was that transition and how did you navigate that?
So I went to North Central, which was a large school. And so what was interesting for me about going to IU was initially the expectation that all the Black students needed to talk to each other. Because I was like, I was used to being one of a few, candidly. I'd been acclimated to that throughout my entire educational experience. And so it didn't really dawn on me that I had any kind of special responsibility to connect with Black students until I started to stay down there a little bit longer. And I experienced some things that reminded me that I was in a certain part of the state and that I needed to find a way to build community. It was also, in a more positive way, it was also a rich experience as far as seeing, Black Greek letter organizations. I joined the Black Student Union and got a chance to experience some student leadership. And in fact, IU was formative in my development. I had an opportunity to do some advocacy down there. We had, and I guess one major experience, there was a mural of a Ku Klux Klan burning a cross in our largest lecture hall on campus. Now, if you go into a large lecture hall and you see a picture of a cross burning in a huge mural, and no one says anything about it, as an African American, or at least for my experience, that just seemed strange to me. It felt like it was a message, and I wasn't clear on what kind of message was being communicated because there was no communication about this cross burning by the Ku Klux Klan. And there was definitely, a Ku Klux Klan member in the hood on a big mural in my psychology 101 classroom. And so all the messages came in. But I think what, on a positive note, as president of the Black Student Union, we were able to come together, advocate, demand that image be explained, make suggestions that maybe that's not the best classroom for folks. Maybe it's supposed to go back to its original use, which is more of a theater kind of art kind of venue. And we ended up getting $4 million over 5 years to increase faculty, staff, student recruitment, and retention. And so we were able to take that experience and turn it and try to make it something that was positive for other students on campus. And that's something that I've appreciated about like the African American political tradition, at least as I understood it, to kind of try to be a consistent voice of social consciousness that bends the moral arc of the universe towards justice.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. Stacey, what experiences or events really shaped how you currently navigate race in America? And you can evolve over the course of decades, months, years, but what were some of those key experiences for you?
Absolutely. And I'll start here. I'm an avid reader and I love to watch documentaries. And one of my favorites is Who Do You Think You Are? And with Henry Louis Gates Jr. And
Mhm.
I think, before we start, that discussion, a lot of this plays into who you think you are, you know, and you think you're one person because of maybe what, family tells you, or maybe what someone else told you you are. And then you have someone like Henry Louis Gates Jr. actually delve into your ancestry. And, what's so fascinating about that show is how, um, tracing your ancestry can become such an emotional journey. And you see, various celebrities and public figures illustrating that. So I think that, when you're able to touch on those broader themes of identity, of heritage, of belonging,
Mm.
it really opens the door and shows all the complexities with ethnicity and the labels that are often imposed upon different racial groups or cultural groups. And it's interesting, I was reading something recently that actually stated that, there are researchers that are finding evidence to support the theory that if you go back far enough, all humans, regardless of race, share common ancestors. So we share more connections than we think. And I think that's, part of the issue there, just the belief that we're all separate, you know, and just even with the titles, Black, African American, Indian, a lot of those titles, they conflate the distinct national identities, cultures, languages, tribes, experiences into just one monolithic label. So, it's interesting because definitely, I have, many personal experiences and historical experiences just from, things that have been passed down that my family members shared with me that have shaped, how I navigate my experience, just, at a very young age, witnessing things subtle and overt. And, as an adult, witnessing things subtle and overt. And I think that the thing that I've learned is how, navigating this experience requires resilience, advocacy, and being very intentional in your building of community. I've learned the importance of allyship, learning more about that, how we can build bridges. And I think, in particular, something that's been very eye-opening, since I've, got to move around a bit, is how geographical location makes all the difference in
Mm.
how you perceive your experience, as an African American. And, I too, experienced quite often being the only, still experiencing that in a lot of uh, situations I find myself in. And that definitely, it opens your eyes to things, but it also, again, I'm going back to the allyship. It makes me more intentional about figuring out how to, build relationships and connections and the safety of those connections.
Wow. That's a lot to unpack, Stacey. In the course of your life, were there any watershed moments or moments that really tested you and helped you develop that, what you phrased as resilience? And and that resilience pushing you to lean into developing allies?
Absolutely. And it's things I think that that you see every day and you wonder, what can I do? How can I help? And I think that's why I'm so passionate about community service, and working with nonprofits, because I mean it's definitely a daily thing. You walk through a community and you see how that community is obviously disproportionately impacted by environmental factors, pollution, not having access to clean water, and thinking about, uh, what can I do, to be part of that solution, and what I'm opening my daughter up to those opportunities as well. What can she do, to help? We can talk about it, but let's be about it as well.
Yeah.
How can we impact our communities, when we see these inequities, with education, with healthcare, with people having access to uh, things that are taken for granted, just professionally, mentorship, entrepreneurship, leadership development. So it's a large thing to unpack for sure, but I think, the way to go about it is to figure out, how can I, get involved in the solution.
Yeah. Both you, Stacy, and Marshawn made me think about what I experienced growing up, particularly from birth up through, say, 17 years of age, where I grew up in Washington, D.C. And this was Washington, D.C. when it was still, quote unquote, the chocolate city. And it was a majority Black city. And my entire neighborhood, we were connected. And I went to an elementary school that was right across the street from the house that I grew up in. And then the middle school, or actually it was a junior high school at the time, it was just maybe 10 minutes walking from the house. And that was a key part of my upbringing. And through that, there was this celebration of Black excellence. There was this celebration of resilience and overcoming and thriving, even through the face of adversity, even through the face of trauma, even through the face of sheer brutality. And I remember growing up in elementary school, there were these competitions throughout the year. It wasn't just in February, but it was throughout the year where we had to memorize all these facts about Black folks that accomplished all these feats. So when I transitioned from DC to Bloomington, Indiana at the age of 17, it was this massive culture shock. And that's why I asked you, Marshawn, about how you transitioned to IU, because I went straight from DC to the middle of Indiana, where I was a majority, my high school, elementary, middle school, 99.9% Black. And then jumping from that experience to a completely different experience. And what I did was I retreated into self. I retreated into the stacks and continued to dive into Eldridge Cleaver and everybody else and Septima Clark, and just reading and reading and reading, and continue to lean into who I am and fostering that identity of excellence. And that gave me that fortitude to navigate that culture shock that I experienced, because it was a shock. And fortunately, I survived and learned how to navigate in not only majority Black environments, but diverse environments as well, which leads to that next question that I have. The concept of America is built on from many to one, e pluribus unum. And that's a perfect, it captures where we are right now as a country, where we're wrestling with that identity of who we are as a country, particularly through the lens of migration, immigration, deportation, and the like. So thinking about the Black experience and how we've wrestled with assimilation, and we've also wrestled with maintaining cultural heritage and who we are, though we're not a monolith. In your experiences and what you all have observed over the years, how have you all navigated those tensions in quote unquote, quote, authentic ways, and also recognizing the places in which we get to operate? I'll open it up to either one of you.
I can hop in. So I know I am not and Ahmed knows this, I'm not a particularly religious person, but I know growing up in the church, I didn't understand it at the time, but I was exposed to what scholars have called African retentions in religion. And so that has to do with something like call and response at the church, the music, beats, even how people responded, if they caught the spirit and things of that nature. And so I think that was something that that I had access to that I didn't really appreciate. But I knew it was different than other church experiences because I had a chance to go to a couple of different churches. And even in that, and I also want to be clear, um, there are other Black churches that are different than the church that I went to, that are a bit more, substantially more reserved. And then that doesn't, and I'm talking about Christian faith. I'm not even talking about like Muslim or other religious faiths and traditions where there's a lot of Black people in those traditions. So I think that was interesting to be a part of an experience where I was being taught how to engage with something greater. And so if assimilation was occurring, it was occurring in that way, where I was going to this place and they were teaching me how to engage with something that is greater than myself. With respect to my other world, which was for me from basically first grade to high school, was school, because that's where I was most of the time. It was very isolating. It was extremely isolating. And I would, get an opportunity to read about some piece of American literature that was, had African American characters, or maybe you might even call it part of the African American canon. But I couldn't really connect with it or even appreciate it because I didn't have, at the time, access to a lot of the just experiences that would help me appreciate it. And that wouldn't come until college when I got a chance to study African American literature more deeply. I had access to African American history just a little bit in my textbooks, but not in a position that centered my experience as an African American and thinking about, the African American soldiers' impact on the Civil War, or the idea that during slavery, every African American wasn't a slave. Like, we had free populations, we had people that were, organized in cities and things of that nature, even during the period of, slavery. And so, as far as navigating it, I think I had to take some time to develop the tools in order to just kind of really appreciate the position that I was in. I was lucky to go to college and have the opportunity to delve deeper into my cultural heritage, to kind of get access to strategies, experiences, reading texts like The Invisible Man, and understanding like how you could both be hyper visible, being the only person in a room, but also invisible by not being seen at the same time, being exposed to the idea of double consciousness, where you might be aware of someone else's perception of you, even while you're looking at the world, getting access to just those concepts and putting a language to it, and having the ability to get access to those tools and then begin to develop strategies. I don't think I was able really to develop the strategies until I had access to the culture and the tools. And I think panels like this are, an excellent way to help folks begin to develop some of those tools. But for me, that didn't occur really until I got to college, even though they were right in front of me. Today, this is a very interesting time. I will say, in my understanding of African American history, we've been through similar experiences where there is a movement away from maybe perhaps an appreciation of diversity, particularly diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think, history does repeat itself when we don't learn our lessons. I think that in any moment, I'm an entrepreneur, so I always see the opportunities in situations, but I'm also very concerned about the direction, and what values we're seeing be lifted up and affirmed, and what values are being pushed down. And so as I'm thinking about like how to not only navigate this, but also how to help my son navigate this, going back to history and returning to Sankofa and thinking about the past and how it helps me think about the future becomes even more important as a tool to help navigate the space. I hope I answered your question. You're on mute.
And I appreciate that. And I'm going to pause real quick because there are so many things that you shared that captures not only this current moment, but what I think successive generations have thought about, processed, and dealt with. You take generations from slavery to Reconstruction, and immediately after Reconstruction, there was a retrenchment and a retracting of policies in this significant shift. And then there was a jump forward, and then there was this pushback. So almost after every time there was a level of fairness and equity and justice, there was this very intentional shift backwards that didn't happen in a vacuum. And when we think about the concept of America and what America was built on, it's not only a political experiment, it's also a social and economic experiment. And more than anything else, it's more so an economic experiment. So when you're able to leverage the economics in a particular situation, it completely shifts the conversation. And how do you do that while maintaining your history and understanding who you are as a people and shaping it going forward and arming the next generation in order to do that? But I'd love to open up the question to you as well, Stacey.
Absolutely. And I think that it's an interesting question, that the idea of assimilation. I think it's somewhat subjective. I don't know that I grapple with that necessarily, just because of how I grew up. I didn't know any different than being the only one. So I think how that influenced me is definitely just a lot more self-discovery. I was really excited about going to college and taking all those African American studies classes, and delving into the Great Migration, which I hope I get to talk about a little bit more later on, and just the cultural impact of that, and just kind of learning more just from a generational standpoint, about who I am and what those things mean. How do they show up, so to speak, and not necessarily classifying something as African American or white or I think that helps when navigating these things, and just knowing that they're part of the human experience, you know and just seeing all the commonalities that we have as humans. And I think that I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the impact of historically Black colleges and education and universities, have on the educational foundations, and the ability for cultural expression, without need of thinking of, I've got to, reduce myself or somehow, fit into a box. I can be myself completely. And also the impact of Black Greek organizations, of which I am a part of one, and definitely exploring your identity through that organization, but also being able to impact other communities through outreach, community service, and being able to connect with others and helping them to feel safe to be themselves. So I think that those were are very impactful ways that people can feel they feel safe and insulated, and not only being able to educate others about the African American experience, but to just authentically be themselves as well.
Yeah. And you said this earlier, Stacey, two things about we are not a monolith by a long shot. And you also mentioned something to the effect of a topic that we're going to talk about now, intersectionality, when it comes to race, class, gender, identity, and the like. When you think about the Black experience, but when you think about the Black experience and how we navigate intersectionality and all the confluence of these different identities, how can society better navigate those overlapping ideas and constructs?
Absolutely. And I love how, Marshawn brought up the idea of, diversity, equity, inclusion, because you navigate these things through exposure. I think that's the biggest issue here, is just not being exposed to other humans that are different than you. It's just that simple. Um, I remember going to school and, having someone tell me that they had never seen a Black person in real life, and so I just could speak about how important that is, just the exposure, for hours. It's a conversation worth having. And not only just the exposure to one person, and thinking that you understand the whole experience through one person. It's the exposure to many different, people from different backgrounds. I mean, that's what diversity is all about. Not just, not necessarily one person from a group in the room or two, but many, and having, that rainbow of experiences. People, knowing that, someone, taking the HBCU, the historically Black, colleges and universities experience, for example, you might have individuals in those communities, but then you have, different groups within that community. You might have someone who's a first generation, college student, and they have one experience that might be very different from someone who comes from a different socioeconomic background, and they're seeing things through a different lens completely. And then back to, the Greek organizations, depending on what organization you're a part of, your lens and your perception, your experiences, may vary. And definitely when you look at just your experience or my experience, as a woman, how, you have racism and then gender inequities on top of that. So, and how that may show up from an intersectional standpoint. So, definitely there are so many ways, to look at that, from, educational opportunities, which are not equal. You will have a different experience based on your educational opportunity, absolutely, in this country. So, I think there are, so many things, to be considered when thinking about, how do we make, our workforce, our schools, our organizations, when people are selecting board members, how do we make those rooms more diverse, so people can learn and be exposed, to different, thought processes and different experiences.
Thank you, Stacey. You brought up DEI, and I know that's something that Marshawn mentioned earlier as well. And we all know what the current political and social climate is that we're navigating currently, particularly as we face a new administration in DC that is influencing legislatures across the country, that's also then influencing municipalities within those states to shift policies centered around diversity, equity, and inclusion, which in turn is also influencing corporations to make shifts as well. And through the lens of that, Marshawn, how do we, as a society, approach and more effectively navigate creating an inclusive environment through those political headwinds?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned earlier, I'm an entrepreneur. If I had the answer to that question, then
Yeah.
I'd be retired. But it is very much a challenge that serious people are thinking about, and I do consider myself a serious person. there's some, as an economist, I look at the data and I understand that demographics are pointing one direction, that we're going to become increasingly more diverse. Even Indiana is going to become increasingly more diverse. Indianapolis, Marion County is approaching, if it has not already entered, a moment where it is majority persons of color in the city. And so now that doesn't necessarily mean, to Stacy's points, that you should expect monolithic viewpoints on politics, and opinions on anything per se, but demographics are definitely pointing towards diversity. The question is going to be whether or not we will be able to, as a society, to think about history and how history and policy should come together to empower people, and whether or not we will also continue to strive to be inclusive. That becomes the challenge of a citizen that is engaged and that is connected to their other fellow citizens. I know that that comes up in a lot of faith traditions. I know from my vantage point, I like to think, I am because we are, which is, some version of e pluribus unum. And I think when you're looking at both concepts, both an African version of I am because we are and a Latin version that we borrow in America of e pluribus unum, you're seeing a similar concept of our connectivity to one another. And so in as much as the demographics are going, we're not becoming less diverse. I don't see that happening. We have the challenge of a citizenry to become historically literate and willing to take that history and figure out how to empower aspects of our community. I think the challenge of inclusivity presents itself in really a kind of an economic kind of context. It is to our economic benefit to have more people empowered in a society to have access to jobs, to housing, to education, because ultimately, if more people are doing well, everybody does well. And so my hope and my aspiration is that, we talked about, moving forward and then a retrenchment and then moving forward, that, this will be this moment and we'll have an opportunity to get to the other side. But even in this moment, we'll leverage strategies borrowed from history to kind of get us through. Because I know with the Black community, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, Black codes, we just got to the Civil Rights era, 1960s. Then we had the affirmative action period, which seems to be wrapping up. I don't know if we're going to go too much further down or too much further up, but I do know that, the Black community will figure out how to thrive and survive no matter what.
Yes, indeed. I know both of you spend a lot of time on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. There are a lot of influencers around us, and those influencers tell a lot of stories. Some stories we agree with, some stories we don't agree with. When it comes to those influencers, how can Black creators and influencers reshape the narratives around race and inclusivity, or is that even their role and responsibility? Stacy, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. The short answer is yes. I think we all do, whether we have a microphone or not. I think, we have to realize that people are always watching, and, we have to, make sure that we are authentic in a way that's healthy. So it's interesting because when you look at, TV, film, social media, you see this oscillation, between stereotypes that are probably very harmful and, these amazing stories of triumph and resilience. So you see, and everything in between. So, the important thing about when you have that sort of a platform is, to make sure, that these stories, that they're impactful, and that, and know that they're going to have intended and unintended consequences, when they go out, So I think that, there are many things that I have seen personally that, present a more, holistic view, which I think is good. And I think that, we probably have a responsibility to speak up when we see something that, may have an intended or unintended impact that is, going to be harmful. So that's kind of my 3-minute take on on that. It's a big topic, an important topic, and I just hope that people exercise their free speech rights responsibly.
Responsibly. Thank you, Stacy. Marshawn?
So one of the ways I've thought about this question is whether or not you're looking at the Black artistic experience as either reductive or expansive. In its most expansive version, you can have, Black artists doing art that thinks about reality, but doesn't necessarily have access or doesn't necessarily connect itself to a traditional Black aesthetic because they're creating they're creating something that's
Mhm.
beyond that. But then, and so in that view, it's expansive. I think when we're dealing with like social media influencers and things of that nature, you may be running it against the more reductive version of a Black experience where it's predicated on stereotypes and just some of the worst, potentially some of the worst values. I know for me, my aspiration is to be the most influential figure in my son's life. I don't know if I'm winning that battle all the time.
Whew, that's a
That
big one.
goal, and to also try to make sure that he is exposed to other figures and expansive views of the African American experience that allows him to not only see differences, but then also to conceive of new possibilities. And so, with both artists and even influencers, I'm excited about the possibilities. But I agree totally with Stacy that like let's be responsible. Let's
Mhm.
if folks are trying to be responsible because just because you want to say certain things, you want to project certain things, doesn't mean you necessarily should.
Yes, indeed. I know we're getting close to time. I just want to say I appreciate both of you being vulnerable and sharing not only your experiences, but views on current events and how we lay a healthy road ahead. What's one final thing you want the audience to know about the Black experience or where we are in America as it relates to race? Stacy?
Absolutely. The one thing that I want the audience, I'm going to challenge the audience to study, to study yourself first, become a lifelong learner about who you think you are, coming full circle and learning how, we're all connected, learning your history, learning the history of others, because others' history is your history. Yeah. So, and definitely learning about, just the impact that African Americans have had, on this country, which is, amazing, in going back to, the Great Migration, that period between 1910 and 1970. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about that. I would encourage people to read, to learn, to visit those places, those uh, self-sustaining African American communities, all across the country, too many to name, everywhere from North Brentwood, Maryland, Nicodemus, Kansas, Seneca Village, New York. It actually was a Black community that existed in the very location that Central Park is in New York. So if you go to Central Park, think about Seneca Village, New York, Eatonville, Florida, uh, so many, too many to name. And, when you go through Chicago, Illinois, visit Bronzeville, and the reason why I'm bringing up all these places is, that time of that those places were incorporated in the time of the Great Migration opened so many doors, to the Harlem Renaissance, research that, the fantastic cultural influence of that period, and just how it gave rise to better economic opportunities and educational opportunities, not just for African Americans, for all of us. I mean, it fundamentally transformed the cultural, the political landscape, and reshaped demographics, and had such a huge economic impact on this country. So, when we talk about, inclusivity, we need to understand the impact, that different groups, have. And that's the one thing, the one takeaway, I hope it, everyone, if you don't remember anything else, understand, the impact that all groups, African American, definitely have had on this country, and how maybe you can be an ally, and learn more and create bridges, and find ways to help others, because when you do that, you're helping the entire community, not just one.
Thank you, Stacy.
Yeah, I would just build off of what Stacy says. I am a proud African American man because I have access to my history. And I think that it is important for other people to be proud of who they are too. I don't think that being an African American man, I'm better than anyone. I think having access to my history allows me to have the confidence to move in the way that I move. I want everyone else to have that same experience. And so I think the celebration of African American history is also a celebration of American history. And that as much as I learn more about my culture and my history, I think it's also important to learn about other people's culture and other people's history. Because I think we're ultimately in this experiment together, this political, social, and economic experiment that is America together. And we're all going to go up together. We're all going to go down together. So
You got that right.
right, yeah. So I would end with that, and particularly as we're thinking about this moment.
Excellent. Liz, if you don't mind, I'm going to riff for just a few moments with Stacy and Marshawn. It's not something that I had planned, but it just popped in my head, and hopefully other heritage panels can try something similar, and we can encourage others to share something that's been meaningful to not only their cultural heritage as it relates to how they identify and how they navigate this world, but I'll start with this. There's a book that I read that was an educational journey for me, and it was fun to read. It was educational. It's a book called How the Word Was Passed by Clint Smith. I'm going to drop it in the chat. How the Word Was Passed. Great read. It's an accessible read. You can probably knock it out in a weekend if you weren't streaming for 8 hours a day. But I would highly encourage those that are interested in learning about some parts of our history. Clint Smith's How the Word Was Passed. Marshawn, Stacy, any book recommendations from the two of you?
I got one. Stacey, I don't know if you want to go first or if you want me to go.
Oh, you can go.
I'll go. So
Sorry to put y'all on the spot.
Yeah, Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Woodson. I actually just ordered it for Alexander. He's going to be reading it over the next couple of weeks. But it's a book by Carter G. Woodson, who created initially what was called Negro History Week, and then which will become Black History Month. It was written at a point where there was a belief that African American history did not exist, and so I really just appreciated him both as a futuristic, visionary leader, but then he also had really practical wisdom for professionals and what they should be doing. Mm-hmm. So that's a key book that I want to make sure I lift up.
Excellent. Thank you. Stacy?
Wow. So many to name. I think that definitely The Bluest Eye and Masada. I think that it's important to read about different aspects of experiences.
Excellent. So we have 4 books from this Heritage Panel list. We have Carter G. Woodson's Miseducation of the Negro. We have Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. We have Assata Shakur's book, Assata, and we have Clint Smith's How the Word is Passed. Highly recommend all four of these books. And Liz, thank you for convening us and getting us together. I think this was a fantastic conversation. Marshawn, Stacy, thank you all again for sharing your experiences and your views. And throw it back to you, Liz.
Thank you, Ahmed. I love the riff. I love those recommendations. The beauty of recording this is that now we have it recorded, so it'll be easy to follow up and order them. Thank you, Marshawn, Stacy, Ahmed, so much for sharing more about you. I love personally just being able to learn more about you personally, but knowing that you're sharing yourself with our community is really a gift. I heard Marshawn say celebrating African American history is celebrating American history. And really, truly understanding that in Black History Month is so essential to another word that I heard all of you say repeated times is our connection. There are so many important concepts about connecting in all of our diversity and also truly understanding the roots of US history. And being able to celebrate that African American history well throughout this month and throughout the year is so essential. So thank you so much, not just for sharing those educational points, but also just talking about who you are and just being who you are as authentic selves, because that's what makes the ISI community so beautiful and worthwhile for our children to be in, because in the end, this is what we want to pass on to our children. I know I feel proud hearing the three of you speak, thinking about my three children being in this community, all connected together. It's something that I value so highly. So thank you for what you've done today and for your being part of this community. So we'll end with that. Look forward to future Heritage Panel presentations. And I also look forward to our community learning more from you all through this recording. So thank you so much.